This is good. At least at the start of the presentation, I get a sense of who's coming in. And after that, it's just... Thank you. Sure.
Anand, we can start.
Hi friends. Good afternoon. So it's really exciting to see all of you here. Welcome back to the second talk of the series, Voices for Nature and Society. I'm really very happy to introduce today's speaker, Devayani Khare. Devayani is a communications consultant specializing in science communication, especially in the field of geoscience. She has a diploma in ecology and a master's in geomorphology from Pune University. She has worked with the Western Ghats Biodiversity Portal and also with NCBS in Mahesh Sankaran's lab. So Devayani has studied geomorphology, ecology, and natural resource management and has a passion for cartography. So during the past decade, she has worked at the intersection of biodiversity, ecology, life sciences, and conservation. And she has anchored projects, designed outreach initiatives, and planned strategic communications. She runs a Geosophy newsletter, which highlights the importance of geography from the people's understanding and their perspective. I'm really excited when I first saw her, when I read her newsletter, and there are some things which are really very, very interesting. And she's interested in science communication and public engagement issues, especially related to geosciences and geomorphology. So welcome, Devayani. We are very nice. We are really very nice to have you on this talk. And over to you.
I'm honored to. Just to set the record straight, though, I didn't work in Mahesh Sankaran's lab. I was working in the communications office, though his lab does some phenomenal work as well. So the topic that I think a lot of you would have seen today, and a topic that's very, very close to my heart, is geoheritage. And I don't think this is something that I really need to introduce, because for any of us who were nostalgic about train journeys before, I guess, flights became so much more convenient, it was the chance to look at the landscape outside our windows as we passed by and watch it change, right? To see the landscape turn from brown sometimes to green, to watch, land use patterns change. And sometimes there would be that one geological feature that we would just in passing question and say, hey, what was that? That kind of looked fascinating. And then the train has zipped on by. So I think in some ways, anybody traveling across the length and breadth of India will have seen some evidences of geoheritage. So let me dive right in. And talk to you about what geoheritage means to me. So just a second, sorry. A lot of manipulation needed, but I'm hoping the map is by and large visible. So the word geological heritage or geoheritage first started becoming common when certain conferences were being conducted about landscape conservation. And it's only later, after these conferences kind of identified even some of the geology as heritage, that a formal definition emerged for geoheritage. When you look at geoheritage, when you look at some of the features that chart the landscape around you, geoheritage was classified as those that allow you or give you some insights into how the earth formed, all the processes that have shaped it in the past and continue to shape it at this point in time. Among those forces, there are abiotic forces. So it could be glaciers, it was volcanoes, it was earthquakes, it was rainwater, rivers, as also some of the biotic components, all of the biodiversity that has kind of roamed the surfaces of the earth, all the way to human history. And if these sites could prove case studies to actually kind of flip through the books of history, as it were, then those were known as geoheritage sites, and we would be able to use them for research or education or referencing. Now, this is a very cold-cut definition of geoheritage, and while it works, to me, there's another definition of geoheritage that I prefer. And to borrow a title of a very famous Dali painting, to me, landscapes are about the persistence of memory, and geoheritage then are sites where those memories are trapped in rocks, or they could be evident with the kind of biodiversity that we see around us. And sometimes you can hear the distant echoes of human history. And as a capsule of all these different memories is what geoheritage is to me. But I don't think definitions ever really served a great purpose. And what I'd like to do is to kind of zoom out a little bit and try to show you certain examples of what geoheritage actually means in the context of India. So most of us know that the Earth has been dated to roughly 4.56 billion years ago. And while the processes on the surface of the Earth have continued to change and from within, there are certain features that still echo stories of these different times of formation. Now, we do not necessarily have records of 4.56 billion years ago, but for those living in Bangalore, on the outskirts of Bangalore, there's a feature that can be traced to around 3.5 billion years ago and is part of some of the oldest continental blocks or slabs known as cratons. So Nandi Hills is part of something known as the Dharwad craton, and we have several such cratons across India, which kind of represent these early continental masses, solid, stable, not shaken by much, and have faced or changed very little in all these years since. Or then we could choose to look at something very different, and skirting the Thar Desert along the Aravalli Hills, today's landscape of desert doesn't really give you an indication that this could be a great place to search for life. But that is exactly what you can do. In this village of Bujonda, it's just one of the many villages across Rajasthan where you can see these features called stromatolites. And there are other stromatolites in places in Rajasthan, in Jharkhand, in Arunachal Pradesh, and Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, all of which kind of indicate the earliest forms of life, which started evolving all the way from around late 2.5 billion years. And then the ones at Bujonda have been dated to around 1.6 billion years ago. And what's key with formations like the stromatolites, which are nothing but microbial mats, or just think of these little carpets of the first ever cyanobacteria. And the cyanobacteria, as we know, were the first organisms to photosynthesize. So they emerged at a time when the Earth did not have very much of free oxygen in the air. And the stromatolites, or these cyanobacteria that later got fossilized, started producing oxygen to a level that finally all other life on Earth could follow. And this is deep history. And sometimes, or most often, Earth was formed by processes that happened on the Earth's surface itself, as I said, either rivers, volcanoes, earthquakes, and the like. But ever so often, landscapes on the Earth were shaped by something from outside, asteroids. And apart from leaving certain impact craters like the one at Lonar and Dala, there are other traces of these cosmic bodies in the form of minerals. And 100 kilometers away from Bangalore, the Kolar gold fields are still mined for the gold. And this gold is a remnant of the asteroids, early asteroids that hit the Earth. So if you fast tracked through geological time, and geology is a fascinating subject that way because you can do that. We're charting the progress of the Indian plate as it migrated from the southern hemisphere and started moving northwards. And in its journey, it crossed a place called the Reunion Hotspot, a little island that's off the coast of Madagascar. But at the time that it was crossing this area, there was intense volcanic activity that was happening. And apart from laying layer upon layer of lava that forms our Deccan traps, there was also another signature formation that kind of happened. So the dating of St. Mary's Island is a little contested, but roughly between 100 and 66 million years ago is when some of the basalt, some of the lava that was flowing and erupting at Reunion hotspots crystallized very rapidly and formed these telltale hexagonal basalt columns. And if this feature seems familiar, it's because in Ireland, people have the Giant's Causeway, and there's a myth attached to it about giants of yore using these as stepping stones. And yet in India, off the Udupi coast, where the St. Mary's Island is, there's very little protection for this 66 million year old formation. Now, this is not just a single feature. It's telling a broader story. So just like the Western Ghats in India, as people know, kind of the continents unzipped at some point in time and broke off to form what is present-day Madagascar. So Madagascar drifted off from the Western Ghats, and the Madagascar still has these kind of mountain formations, range formations, called the Angavo entrapment, complete with a little gap that coincides very perfectly with the Palkad gap here. And in Madagascar, it's called the Ranotsara gap. So these two continents kind of unstitched or unzipped from each other and drifted apart, and India continued its journey northwards. What's also fascinating, and I've found no literature from it, so I might be wrong, is that to the north of Madagascar, there is a very similar formation to this columnar basalt structure. And very interestingly, they're called Nosy Mitsio, and they're also likened to pipe organs. And nobody has really ever studied how those formations in Madagascar might be very similar to St. Mary's Island. But that's also why geoheritage is kind of fascinating. So the basalt traps kind of formed over time, and India continued to drift northwards till it collided with Eurasia and started kind of diving in under the continent. So if you were to travel around 30 kilometers south of Leh to this tiny village called Lato, what you have is evidence of this colossal crash that happened, well, started 52 million years ago and continues to happen to date. Now, if you look at that electric line for scale, you can get a sense of just how staggering these crags are. And they're located right along the Indus River. a river, by the way, which continued to flow, was flowing before and continued to flow as these Himalayas kind of rose up beneath it. And what's not very visible, but you'll see a little streak sandwiched between all these layers of rock, is this telltale green-blue mineral group called serpentine. And serpentine is the evidence that has allowed us to construct that these two continents collided. And this formation is seen in various different stretches along the Indus River in what is known as the Indus and Yarlung suture zone. So this is again slightly deep history. And let's fast track a little bit more through time. And we're in the heart of central India.
वो पाइप बाद में डाल सकता ना, ओवरफ्लो पाइप डाला, टेरेस का जो पाइप जो एक्सटेंड कर दे.
Sorry.
Manish, can you please turn off your mic?
Yeah, sorry about that. I've muted Manish.
Great, no worries. So if we fast track through time and take a look at, let's say, 74,000 years. And interestingly, what happened didn't actually happen in central India. It happened all the way in Indonesia. Try to imagine where Indonesia is. And a super volcano erupted around 74,000 years ago. And what happened is that the ash fell all over the world. And there are records of 4 days, perhaps, that there may not have been much daylight. And that ash traveled all the way across the world and was deposited in layers along the Son River in central India. Now, what's fascinating about this location is not just that this volcanic ash was kind of blew over and has gotten kind of deposited within the layers of soil, but that archaeological digs found stone tools both beneath and over this layer of ash. The Dhaba locality in around these Mahadev Hills is testimony to the fact that early humans moved out of Africa, traveled along the Arabian Peninsula, across Central Asia, and had made their way all the way into central India at this point in time when the volcano erupted, might even have seen this, and then continued to flourish after. It's also a remarkable site because not all early human settlements survived the volcano. The ash fallout was such that a lot of fertile land became infertile after, and there are few records that remain after. So this little sandwiched layer of ash with stone tools above and below is a perfect example of how localities preserve the echoes of human history. And perhaps in different waves, human civilization continued to flourish in these areas all the way till in around 10,000 years ago, they left their mark as rock art at Bhimbetka caves. Bhimbetka caves, again, are fascinating because at some point in time, there was a very different, so the way the Bhimbetka caves were discovered wasn't like a lot of archaeological finds where people just stumbled upon it and then tried to construe who'd done these paintings and trace it back. But researchers were trying to understand what were some of the essential conditions for prehistoric life. And they decided that stone outcrops, a river flowing nearby, and a forest patch would be key to prehistoric civilization. And when they triangulated these three conditions, they found that Bhimbetka met the criteria. And when they went to explore the site, they found the rock art. So in a way, it was a reverse discovery of an archaeological find that is among India's best geoheritage records of human history. So this brings us to the question of why geoheritage is important. A lot of the geoheritage sites tell not just these stories of how the earth was formed and how it evolved, but they also allow us a better understanding of landscape evolution, of tectonic activity in the past, of where mineral resources can be found, where groundwater resources existed before and still do. How rivers migrated over time, and then how human civilizations migrated along with that. And for this aesthetic, cultural, and scientific value, I think geoheritage sites need to be conserved. Geoheritage sites also serve as case studies, as I said, to kind of flip through the books of history, and as an educational resource for us to better understand our past. I think geoheritage needs to be something that we focus on. Lamentably, in India, a lot of heritage is only preserved if there's a price tag attached to it, if it can kind of bring us certain revenue. And what's strange is that for all that we bleat on about heritage, and we're building monuments that talk of very recent history, structures that tell stories of millennia or even billion years, I think makes for a very compelling geotourism site. And it allows us to kind of convey to the wider public what exactly the history of the earth and what the history of India is. And at the same time, geotourism can allow some of these sites, which could be world-renowned examples of certain geological processes, to actually generate certain revenue for their own upkeep and maintenance. So where do we stand at present with geoheritage? Well, in 2001, UNESCO started its work across the world in classifying what is known as global geoparks. At present, there are something like 169 geoparks in 44 different countries. And India, despite having many contenders, has no geopark on record. The Geological Survey has listed something like 34 sites, but the list is neither updated, and those sites that have been kind of recognized are not really protected or cordoned off or included in development plans. Very few of them even have interpretation signs. Some of them that do, the signs are in really poor condition, and we're kind of just waiting on a lot more of the sites to just get identified and recognized. Another issue with looking at geoheritage as an isolated, singular feature is that we are missing the bigger picture. We're missing the bigger stories that it has to tell. And for that, we need to zoom out of a geological formation and look at it from a landscape perspective. When we're able to look at geoheritage from a landscape perspective, I think we can ask some very interesting questions, like, how did this landscape form? What were some of the climates that influenced how this landscape looks today, and thereby the formation of this particular geoheritage site? We can ask questions about biogeography. Why is certain biodiversity found where it is today? Because sometimes that is a function of the climate, of the geology, and of past processes. And finally, when we look at geoheritage against the backdrop of landscapes, we can also better understand human history and how it may have had to change and evolve and migrate against this ever-changing backdrop that it had. So to me, geoheritage sites are more than just dead and mute features. They're an integral part of the landscape from a geographical, a cultural, and an ecological perspective. And if we're able to understand these perspectives, I think we can develop some integrated approaches to landscape conservation. There's another more exciting reason to look at geoheritage from the perspective of landscapes. If we're able to zoom out, I think we can tell stories at 3 different timescales: geological eras, evolutionary timescales, and millennia of human civilizations. Now, what exactly do I mean by telling these stories at 3 different timescales? And what do I mean by a landscape perspective? of geoheritage. I'd like to illustrate what I'm saying with 3 examples. And the first one is the Pranhita Godavari Valley, or known as the PG Valley, which starts somewhere in the Gadchiroli district in Maharashtra, in East Maharashtra, and continues all the way to the Godavari Delta, and has a 300 million year old record. So what's happened is, over time, the Godavari River has deposited alluvium in this entire delta stretch. And the alluvium, the soft silt material that kind of allows land to be fertile and agriculture to kind of flourish, has preserved an incredible record of both geology, biodiversity, and human history. So the Godavari flows through what is known as a rift zone, which, think of it as like a massive crack through the earth. And what the valley kind of represents is this repeated zipping and unzipping of the rifts of the early continental masses, of the Gondwana landmass, as it were. And that rift is still retained, along which the river continues to flow. World over, where fossils are found, you either find plant fossils or you find animal fossils. It's very, very rare to find both plants and animals in the same spot. And the PG Valley is one of those rare places where you not just find plant fossils that lend credence to Alfred Wegener's continental drift theory, right? Because its closest counterparts are found in other continents across the world. But you also have these petrified or fossilized tree trunks. Beyond that, this alluvium preserves a record of the entire sequence of vertebrate evolution, from primitive fish to early amphibians and dinosaurs, and even the first mammals. This is an example of fossil wood, and this is one of the prehistoric fish that were kind of found there. But ironically, there are very few photo records of these fossils, and coverage-wise, it's all over the place. And while there's a lot of research that is there, documentation is still slow. And apart from the geology and the biodiversity that's preserved there, we've also found stone tools. And that's how this valley kind of tells these stories at 3 different timescales: geological, evolutionary, and human timescales. Second example I'd like to take is laterite plateaus. And sadly, there are no maps available for these plateaus. So I'd like you to just imagine what's the northwestern Ghats. So what's interesting about the laterite plateaus is that geologically, they were very similar to the rest of the Western Ghats. But at some point in time, around 65 million years ago, there were certain chemical weathering processes that started acting at speed in this entire area and resulted in these plateau formations. So anybody who's traveled from Mumbai to Mahabaleshwar, Satara, down past Ratnagiri and Sindhudurg into Goa would have noticed these formations. What's iconic about the laterite plateaus is not just do they have bear the evidence of around 65 million years of climate and chemical weathering, but that for a long time they were considered to be barren landscapes. And it's only now, in these past 2 decades, that they have been recognized as endemic hotspots for species. There are certain plant species that erupt seasonally, where this entire place is converted into a plateau of flowers, and there are certain endemic flowers that bloom. But all year round, and especially in the monsoon, you also get to see a lot of amphibians and reptiles in this area. And I think new species are being constantly discovered from what was once thought to be pretty barren and desolate. In around the early 1990s, along the Kushavati River in South Goa, an entire area of river silt suddenly got washed away. And what was left behind in these laterite riverbanks were these incredible carvings, something like the two that are there below. And they're known as petroglyphs, which are carvings in stone. And the laterite is an incredibly difficult medium to carve things into. And as you can see, these are examples of some of the early human life and was dated back to around 20,000, 30,000 years ago. And might be some of South India's most significant prehistoric site, and yet there's very little protection around it. And soon after these sites were discovered, there were more sites like these discovered in the Konkan stretch, in Ratnagiri and Sindhudurg districts. And this is another landscape which kind of tells you these stories at 3 different timescales. The last example I'd like to consider would be Inselbergs. And for those of you who've either read my newsletter or might be following me on Twitter, know that this is quite a pet favorite with me. But one of the reasons I'm fascinated by these landscapes is that they are seen in so many locations in India. It's not an exclusive. But what's fascinating about it is, so that's what I mean by an Inselberg structure. It just looks, and I'm sure you've seen these around you, just like a heap of boulders that someone's just carefully stacked together. And they're just all over the landscape. So geologically, everywhere that's marked craton, which, as I'd mentioned earlier, are these stable, old formations of the crust, that's where you will see these Inselberg formations. Piles of rock that represent a bedrock that got exposed at some point in time and in its own place kind of shattered apart with the help of rainwater to kind of give these very distinct, iconic formations. I think most famous is the one around Hampi, and somewhere the way the temples are set against this formation is just iconic. So what's incredible about the Inselbergs is not just is it evidence of this rain-weathered geology that has taken millennia to kind of form, but Inselbergs have also been studied in other geographies like Australia, where the Ayers Rock is one of the more famous examples. But Australia is a very different climate. In Africa, Inselbergs are formations that are associated with extreme temperatures. They suddenly have these wet spells and then they go into dry spells. And these extreme conditions have meant that Inselbergs are outcrops for endemic biodiversity. But in India, human history has shaped these landscapes in a very different way, because we've had pastoral activity against these landscapes for the longest time. And where communities herd their cattle and their livestock, the livestock roam around through these Inselbergs and leave behind droppings that provide nutrition for biodiversity. So unlike a lot of the Inselbergs across the world, Inselbergs we have in India actually host a really incredible level of biodiversity. And yet it's a formation that isn't studied as often. And I think the list can go on. There are so many other sites where you could look at how these 3 timescales of geology, evolution, and human civilization have played out. So how do we go about not just recognizing these sites, but conserving them? And I think it could all start with having a more complete inventory of the sites. In a country like India, there are way more than 34 sites that are worthy of recognition and protection. And once we have this inventory, we need dedicated teams to document and collate this information and even to map it so that they can be demarcated, cordoned off, and put up in a place so that development can never come anywhere close to these formations. Only after we have that in place can we set these up as for education and outreach. Very often what happens is a lot of artifacts, geological artifacts like minerals or fossils, are extracted from a site and hosted in a museum somewhere else where they lose this context of landscape. So I do not think geological sites should become museums, not even at that location. But I think by reimagining these interpretation centers, by making them interactive, immersive, to be really able to design visitor experiences in a way that allow people to step into the locality and get this bigger perspective on heritage, I think will give us a more far-reaching sense and taste of what India's heritage is all about. So I'd like to end with a final thought that kind of echoes what I had said before, my definition of geoheritage. I think landscapes are about the persistence of memory. And if we are able to showcase these landscapes in its entirety, I think we have a fair chance of preserving geoheritage as it should be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Devayani. It was really wonderful. You know, over 3.6 billion years, and from Lato to Pichi, it was just mesmerizing. Really enjoyed your talk. Thank you so much. We can have questions in the chat box. Anybody who has questions can please type it in the chat box and I can read it out to Devayani.
Thank you, VASUDHA. Thank you, Ananda. I'm glad. Hope it was broad enough, but I think on another note, I think these are just very few examples that I'm able to give. And I think there are so many more landscapes that are waiting for such stories to be told. And if there's one takeaway that you could have from this talk is to be able to look at those landscapes. Your next train journeys don't happen so often, but maybe in a different way. I'm not sure that the Goa petroglyphs have been properly dated, but the evidence, and there are some research papers that kind of say 20 to 30,000 years, though it seems like a really long time span. I'm not sure why that has not happened. It did come under the classification of the ASI a while ago. Well, 1991 roughly is when it was discovered, and we are in 2021, if I'm not mistaken, and we've done very little. And not just for those sites, even the ones in Konkan, there's development happening around, there's laterite mining that goes on, and there are several petroglyphs that have been destroyed in the process. So I don't know why the studies have not kind of happened, and there should be more literature. So the serpentine strips, well, it's just a mineral formation that represents these intense pressure and temperature. So they're formed in these kind of conditions. And usually serpentine veins are evidences of where continents collided. Sorry, the questions are rushing on. Just give me a second. So yes, and that's why serpentine strips, not just in the Himalayas, serpentine veins just anywhere are representative of collisions of land masses. It's one of those iconic minerals. Why are plant and animal fossils not found together? Good question. The conditions, so remember the evolution of plants and the kind of fossils that we have versus when animals started evolving, they're spread apart like millennia apart. And sometimes the conditions that lent themselves really well for fossilization at the time of the plants may not lend itself so well to animals and then again humans. So there is something to be said about that alluvium, though there's alluvium found in other places. I'm sorry, Anand, but I may not be authority enough to say why is Godavari an exception, worth more study. And but it is one of those rare formations, and it's such a tiny little chunk. And some of our most iconic dinosaur finds and the scale, pretty intact specimens of dinosaurs have all come from the PG Valley. The Aravalis, yes, actually the Aravalis are pretty well studied, not just in the context of the stromatolites, but as these old fold formations. So much like the Himalayas represent this little crumpling of continents that kind of happened, the Aravalis are much older formations of the folds. So you will and you should find a lot of literature on the Aravalis. Of course, nowhere as close to the Himalayas. It's like one of those grand examples world over, but there is enough. Dolmens. So I think apart from petroglyphs and cave art, dolmens are another illustration. I'm not an archaeologist, but they do represent burial sites, is what a lot of conjecture says about dolmens. And interestingly, there are dolmens seen all over the Western Ghats as well. Again, poorly documented. Munnar's dolmens are quite well known, but there are others all along the stretch of Uti, Kunur, along basically the Nilgiris that have not been so well documented. Plan for outreach for schools. Invite me, I'll be there. But yes, I think where geoscience is concerned, I think life sciences and ecology have kind of gone in leaps and bounds where outreach is concerned. And I cannot consider doing outreach for schools via Zoom. So if that chance arises and I'm able to take people out into the field, I really think I don't need to be talking as much with outreach for schools. I think the rocks will be able to tell a lot of stories on their own. So it would really be great. Nope, there is no geoheritage map available. Even the GSI just merely lists the sites, and I guess documentation or like a story to that would be something that could be great scope. If and when either I have time, or if Jagan, you're keen on taking that on, I'd be happy to help out. Right. So Kartik, not just Panhara has these columnar basalt structures, they're also visible in some parts of what's known as Sironcha, which is again in this Gadchiroli district in Maharashtra. I personally haven't seen them, but I've heard that even there have been certain things. And I found an old British lithograph, I think it's called, those old, linocut, that's it. This old painting that also showcased columnar basalt somewhere in central India, but that site has also been destroyed. So I think if we don't document this, more and more sites are kind of disappearing and we'd never really know about it. So Vasudha, there isn't much of a historical perspective on geoheritage. The term geological heritage kind of came up at certain conferences, and there are certain definitions that are used, which largely talk about how these can be used as case studies for research and science and referencing. So the concept of geoheritage, since because of UNESCO's work, has been kind of evolving. And now with so many sites across the world, these concepts will change. And what's really exciting about geoheritage is, while we've largely been looking at these billion and million-year-old stories, there are some people who believe that processes that are still happening today should also be considered as geoheritage. So can you imagine a whole river suddenly being cordoned off and the story of the river being told while you kind of go along it? And I think that could have great scope. I don't know what the significance of the labyrinth is. I'd kind of likened it to the one in Westworld where the robots are going through this entire self-awakening. But yes, labyrinths are structures that have been seen in other parts, and not just in the formation of carvings, but actual labyrinth structures, mazes that have been created underground, either to hide treasure or some such. I wish we knew more. Right. So Suhail, yes, the official classification of geoheritage sites is wildly different. And I think what could be considered as, well, not just geoheritage, but biogeoheritage of sorts could be sacred groves. There are different words for sacred groves across India, and that is definitely one of the best examples I can think of where community protection has allowed these forests to exist. And very recently on the outskirts of Gurgaon, there's a place called Mangarbani. And most wildlifers go there in pitta season with their massive lenses to capture the pitta. But the Mangarbani is not just a sacred grove, but recently they found examples of rock art in those stretches. And I've heard of similar examples in Rajasthan as well. But again, very poor documentation of this, and I'm sure there are a lot more such examples elsewhere. Ananda, I wish we could kind of preserve them without having a formal category or classification. But I think with, as we're saying, if community protection needs to happen, if citizen-driven protection needs to happen, we first off just need to know exactly how many such examples there are. And sometimes you come across this when you're traveling to different locations and people tell you, wahan par humne ye aise aise dekha tha, there's some rock art there, there are dolmens around. And then you realize that a lot of these have not really been identified. So yes, I do feel protection can happen before classification, but I think it's one of those cycles. And I do feel that if we're able to categorize them, we will kind of know the rate at which they're at least being lost. My newsletter is not yet a good enough resource for the Himalayas. I have mentioned and recommended this source quite often. Suvrat Kher's blog, Rapid Uplift, actually has a lot of pieces on the Himalayas, and it's a little more technical, but it kind of gives you this sense that you can never really quite grasp everything. And I'm constantly digging into the archives to kind of look at different formations. So Jai, I would recommend the blog, and that's really one go-to resource that I can think of. There's a lot of published literature for the Himalayas, but what you really need is something that's kind of linking what that research means in the context. Thank you so much, Reshna. I'm currently not pursuing any projects in education and outreach, though I would love to. To be very honest, it has been, so part of my profile also says dormant geomorphologist. So it's something that I had studied around 10 years ago. And I'm kind of getting back to it now after years of having worked in ecology, conservation, and other projects. So wow, I would love to know more about the Scottish context too. And yes, I'm sure there are a lot more parallels to be drawn between heritage sites across the world with the Indian context. It's just lamentable where when you travel abroad, they make, thank you so much, Jagan, for sharing that blog link. So when you travel abroad, the hoo-ha that they make with some of their geological features, which is great, which kind of gives you this insight, right? They've built these interpretation centers and they're charging you for it, which costs you a good amount when you're traveling on budget. But in India, we have no such context at all. On the outskirts of Pune, I remember years ago, I'd visited this formation known as the Nighoj potholes. World over, some of the photos that I've seen of pothole formations, I don't think they can compare to Nighoj. Now, I haven't really seen them all over. But what's ironic is there was this temple built on the banks of this lovely black basalt, which is like this scooped out, scalloped out, dolloped out ice cream chunks. And this entire Swiss cheese-like formation, which is 50 feet deep. And a white temple built on the side, painted like a molten candle that's just kind of dripping into this formation. And people come to the temple, Malganga temple, and they worship there and they come to the particular thing and they look at it and they're like, oh, there are holes. And you're like, no, what this represents when you see these kind of scooped out structures is actually a river that flowed in such speed and with such force that it had these massive boulders that it was using to scallop the landscape into the Swiss cheese formation. Imagine the size of the boulder that carved out something like this. So I definitely feel there are so many sites that kind of could do with a lot more. Thank you, Madhusudan. So this is a very interesting question because in India, I don't think we've quite studied it, but last year I stumbled upon some research that was trying to set the context of where these minerals have occurred and then how the industrial revolution and then the industrial age maps exactly onto a lot of these minerals. This was, of course, in the context of UK. And I do feel that India can also, like where our current mines are located, for instance, not just our gold mines, but our coal seams, all of this, I think, has this richer history to tell. If we know that Kolar, for one, or other gold seams, had this 2.5 billion year history of asteroid impacts. Where did the coal come from? And this coal all the way stretching into the Khasi and Garo hills as well in Northeast India. So it's not just this little belt in central India, but elsewhere. Madhusudan, I wish I knew better about how these things can be mapped, but I know that there's scope for these minerals to kind of take a broader perspective on how and when they were formed. Kritika, the one book that I will recommend straight off the bat, and I think a lot of people would have kind of read it, and voila, it's on my table, is Pranayala's Indica. It provides a really great broad overview of the kind that hasn't quite been written for India, which is talking about the evolution of a lot of these formations. There are a few other books, but off the top of my head, I feel Indica would be a great starting point. Phew. Okay.
Thanks, Devayani.
Like a rapid fire.
Yeah, it was super. Your passion is really inspiring. There's a question from Sridhar, Divya, and Aprajita. Thanks for a lovely talk.
Oh, this is the Arunachal consignment.
Yeah. Are there geoheritage sites
underwater.
in India, underwater, freshwater?
So there are archaeological sites underwater, such as the one at Dwarka. There has been some research done by the National Institute of Oceanography. A hotly debated and oft-cited location underwater is, or partly underwater, is the Ram Setu bridge between India and Sri Lanka. And ever so often it gets likened to well, the Ramayana. And a lot of evidence is piling up that says that it was a man-made structure. So those are the underwater structures that I can think of. What else? I'm sure below, like in where you are right now, Northeast India, won't quite be underwater, but subterranean of sorts. I'm sure, I mean, there's an entire network of caves that has been formed in these karst and limestone formations. And limestone formations are really great because it gives you a sense of why certain rivers disappeared or kind of went underground. So I think those sites could also be really great examples. Rohit, is there a cap on the questions or can I keep going?
Yeah, we can keep going. I think we have 5 more minutes, so.
Perfect, okay.
Yeah.
Cosmic elements in coastal petroglyphs. GS, I'm guessing you have read Eric von Daniken and his entire theory, the Raleigh theory where aliens kind of came. So I'm not really sure why we don't see cosmic elements, but maybe one of the examples to take up to say aliens may not have, I don't know, early human civilization may not have seen aliens, but I don't have a clear answer to that. Great. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So when you're mapping the bathymetry or the ocean surface, there are examples of these underwater fans of sorts, very similar to the ones you see in delta formations around. So not just what's happened in the Sundarbans, right? The river kind of expands, or in Godavari. But yes, the Bengal fan could be a great underwater example as well. Thanks, Chintan. Great, I think.
Devayani, that was fantastic. I'm sure your talks and your blogs are going to inspire a lot of people to take up geology and study geoheritage sites
I
more
hope
and
so.
bring more attention to them. Really cool.
Thank you so much.
There's one more. There's one
I
question from
think
Richa.
you're talking about, Rich, I think you're talking about some of the quarries that are there on the outskirts. In fact, you can kind of see them when you're landing into Bangalore. They're very distinct, slightly whitish looking. Yes, they are geologically significant because they are metamorphic structures of sorts, like little outcrops that have been created, and they do have remnants of some really old formations. But whether they are significant enough, I think that categorization will always be tricky. How significant is enough to kind of protect them? But most of them have already been quarried for the longest time as for like construction sites and for just basic fencing and things like that. So I can't say what more significance and how exactly we start classifying these to make sure that beyond the tipping point, we do kind of start protecting them. Penukonda, Anantapur. I don't know specifically of the region you're talking about, but I do know in the Anantapur district in Andhra Pradesh, the Inselbergs that I mentioned do have these telltale formations called dikes, where if there was a particular crack that ran through these old cratons of sorts, and the magma erupted, they formed these very distinct, clear demarcations. And you see this all over. You don't, well, Anantapur is one of the places, but all over, if you're trekking in these areas, you do see these dike formations, which are like walls. And sometimes if the structures around have kind of eroded, it gets preserved as this dark basalt wall. Yes, Peninsular Gneiss in Lalbagh is also one of the examples of these old formations, but the gneiss is a little different from the Nandi Hills because it's a process that has been, a formation that has been weathered since. Voila. Thanks, Sanjay. I'll take a look at the geotourism hotspots. That would be insightful. There was another book that was published by the University of Pune that also kind of documented, but they weren't just looking at geological sites, they were looking at geomorphic sites, which again is a great resource. I figured, Jagan, that Anand is from Anantapur, aptly named. Thanks, Chintan. Yes, the Avalahalli forest has a dike, and I'd kind of put it on the geology map as well. So yes, for anyone who's interested in joining Vena and me on some of our forest trails, I can show you this dike. It's 10 kilometers from North Bangalore or Central. Great. I think just in time, wrap up. Thank you so much, Reshna, and everybody else for attending this. This was fun.
Thank you so much, Devayani, for such a fascinating talk. We all thoroughly enjoyed it. And it was really fascinating to learn about India's geoheritage sites. And I'm sure you've got a lot of people interested in the geoheritage sites. And that brings us to the end of this session. I would just like to tell everyone that next Friday, we have Dr. Vishnupriya Kolipakka from the Wildlife Institute. She'll be talking about the endangered Ganges River dolphins. So please join us. Thank you very much for joining. And thank you so much for a lovely talk again, Devayani. Thanks a lot.
Thank you again. Oh, yeah, sorry, I've been sending off direct messages, but thank you, everyone. Seeing the comments kind of come in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's wonderful.
Stop the recording. Okay.